One of the most exciting aspects of writing and even reading fiction is the world in which the characters live. Is it a version of Earth where humans have enhanced genetics, giving them superpowers when they hit puberty? A world filled with anthropomorphic dogs living in Brisbane, Australia? Or is it a world in which a drunk and disorderly Santa decides to embrace Frank Castle levels of vigilantism after a rough Christmas Eve? We're going to be looking at how to take familiar elements and transform them into an imaginative new experience. I'm your host, Garrett K. Jones, and we are continuing our Season 5 deep dive into exploring elements of world building. Hey, welcome back to The Right Way. We have a great episode in store for you with this week's content, but before we jump into this month's writing tips, there are a couple of announcements that you need to be aware of. If you didn't get a chance to watch last week's live stream, I have it linked down in the video description. This is also going to be the last video of 2022, meaning that you won't get another video until 2023. Thankfully, that's actually quite literally tomorrow. And we have a new video coming out a week from today, so that's awesome. Also good news, you can pick up some sweet merch at the store on Teespring by clicking on the link in the video description. You can get shirts like this awesome Right Way shirt over there on that website. You can also get a mug, posters, and so many other very cool options. Just go ahead and take a look at the link. The prices are very, very friendly. Lastly, there is a new section of content added to the archives section on the companion site for my books. The new lore section has content about the history of the 5 kingdoms. The first bit of content that was added in November was the story of the elves, and it breaks down the 7 different types of elf that are in my series. And while only a handful of elves currently still exist in the archives of Ysink Ran, there are more yet to be seen. Check out this video clip showing the 7 elf branches. World building is one of the most crucial aspects of writing. We're going to continue looking at Ellen Brock's world building Bible template and applying it through the lens of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Last month, we examined what the Avatar's world looks like by exploring locations, travel, and architecture and infrastructure. This month, we are tackling 3 more categories from the 21 that Brock listed. Today, we are covering medicine, professions, and economy. Let's dive in, shall we? We are going to start with medicine.
I brought diseases.
Yes, diseases. Those are the first 4 subcategories. We're looking at those diseases that are curable, incurable, common, and rare. The world of Avatar doesn't actually have much in the way of physical illnesses. There is one Season 1 episode, The Blue Spirit, where Sokka and Katara are sick with what I can only assume is a flu or a really heavy cold of some kind. They had low-grade fevers, chills, a cough, and the sniffles. And we do see characters suffer from motion sickness, extreme dehydration, and experiencing hallucinations because of inadvertent and administered substances. But we don't see much in the way of actual illnesses. In fact, we see more exploration into mental health. Each of the main characters offers a fascinating study into how mentally healthy they are, with Princess Azula serving as the prominent example of someone suffering from mental instability. A lot of what she suffered was actually brought on by the horrible treatment by her father and his abusive behavior. But medicine also involves treatments as much as ailments. It gets you to look at the costs and the availability of medicines, as well as the legality of certain substances or potions. Now, if we jump back into Sokka and Katara's experience with being sick, the cure was sucking on frozen pond frogs because their skin secreted some kind of mucus that killed the infection. Now, I don't know how accurate that would be from a scientific standpoint. There are far too many species of frogs that will just as easily kill you if you touch them, let alone suck on their frozen amphibious bodies. Really, the most we ever see of sick people is the river folk of the Fire Nation, who are sick from the gunk polluting their river from the nearby Fire Nation Army weapons factory. They are treated and are given medicine, but we never see what it actually looks like or how it's administered. But the best healing that we do see is from waterbenders like Katara, with the ability to channel healing energies through their waterbending. As far as legal and illegal substances go, we don't see much of that referenced in Avatar either, with the exception of Iroh accidentally poisoning himself while trying to make tea, which wasn't illegal, just kind of dumb and comical. And of course, Sokka drugging himself on cactus juice and buzzard bee honey.
Suit yourself. It's very thirst quenching though. Drink cactus juice. It'll quench you. Nothing's quenchier. It's the quenchiest.
So here's tip number 1. Plan out how your characters will get treated in the event they get sick, injured, or severely mistreated by abusive relatives. This can have a lasting effect not just on the world building that you put into your story, but the development of your characters as well. Zuko and Azula were completely jacked up as kids by their father, but Zuko was balanced out by his uncle's unwavering and unconditional love, while his sister constantly lived for the approval of her narcissistic father, which she never got. She spited the one parent who loved her, only to get abandoned by the parent who only cared if she failed. Moving on to the next category, we have professions. While you've got your common, less common, and rare jobs, you also have to consider things like unemployment rates. And those are important because they affect the governmental and the economic infrastructure. And then you have to consider the dynamics that affect restrictions based on gender, race, species, and education. 30 years ago, it was unfathomable for me to think there would be an entire generation of people trying to get rich by posting stuff on the internet. He says ironically as he is posting stuff on the internet. Yeah, I know, but think about how the workplace has evolved over just the span of your lifetime, and you'll see what kind of changes I'm talking about. Then it's important to recognize how job fields themselves can change and the demographics of those markets can change. Case in point, most teachers in the United States were men during the late 18th century and through most of the 19th century. It wasn't until the 20th century that started to change, and now women work more predominantly in education than men do. In Avatar, we see a wide variety of jobs, especially in the more developed areas like the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation. You have performers, you have artists, you have innkeepers, merchants, shippers. No, not those little tweens who use shorthand for relationship and use it as a verb to describe two fictional and or real characters they think should hook up. That phrase is stupid. Stupid, do you hear me? As is the phrases, that slaps, that's bussin', and yeet. Ugh! Modern slang sucks. Just absolutely sucks. But I digress. Your world building needs to display a real understanding of what the job market looks like in order to make it as believable and as lived in as possible. So here's writing tip number 2. Research job markets and prominent professions depending on the time period and the culture that you are using for inspiration. It's not just about the realism. If you're writing a story where the characters live in a world that is similar to medieval Europe, you're not going to have things like automotive industrialists living amongst the populace because it wouldn't make any sense. Now maybe if you were writing steampunk, that would work, but it wouldn't work in medieval fantasy whatsoever. The last category we're looking at today is economy. According to Ellen Brock's World Building Bible, there are 5 bullet points that I'm going to condense into just 3. Distribution of wealth, lifestyle by class, and the monetary system and bartering. Avatar puts this on display very, very well, especially as we get into the 2nd season and we get to see more of the Earth Kingdom. Team Avatar's first time in Ba Sing Se shows the audience everything they need to see about the city's economy. The lowest ring towards the outer wall is where the poorest people live. This is also where you're going to find most of the criminal element in the city, and the reason for that is because criminality tends to thrive in poverty. Not always, but poverty does generate desperation, which can lead to specific types of crime. We'll come back to this topic in a future video. The middle ring of the city, however, has the merchant or the middle class, if you want to call them that. And obviously, the 3rd ring has all of the government higher-ups as well as the Earth King and his palace. The higher up you go in the rings and the further away from the outer wall you get, the more opulence the audience sees. But that opulence brings with it excesses in how people eat, how they dress, how they live. Lifestyles. Now this was actually something that was tackled very interestingly in a recent episode of Star Wars Andor. During the series' 6th episode, audiences are introduced to an Imperial Commandant who has gotten so fat off the spoils from his position that he literally cannot fit into his dress uniform. This brings me to writing tip number 3. Explore the ways that your characters and their society think about wealth, its distribution, and how they choose to live their lives based on the finances that they have in their possession. You can tell a lot about people by how they spend money and what they spend their money on. In the real world, for example, some of the wealthiest people don't dress wealthy. They wear very comfortable clothes like jeans and a hoodie. And speaking of money, let's talk monetary systems. The Avatar cartoon series makes a distinction that the different governments have different types of money. Aang lived among the air nomads who bartered for what they needed, but never clung to the illusion of owning anything. The Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation, and to some extent the Northern Water Tribe, had more complex monetary systems, although they were not explored in detail during the series. They did have different aesthetics indicative of the cultural influence, but there's never a breakdown of denominations or the cost of items purchased in markets. So here is writing tip number 4. Consider the kind of monetary system that you want to use in your series. The more detail that you can provide to your reader without getting bogged down in the minutiae, the better it will be. As an example, in my book series, the 5 Kingdoms use a singular currency, just like the European Union does with the euro as its singular currency. In my series, the money is called drox, and it comes in the form of coins. 1 gold coin is worth 5 silvers. 1 silver is worth 10 bronze. In my newest book, I had to research exchange rates because different countries use different types of currency, and exchange rates may not always be equal across the board. From real-world perspectives, when I lived in Japan 22 years ago, 1 yen was exactly 1 penny, so something that cost 1,000 yen was the equivalent of $10 in the United States. That has since changed, but hopefully you see where I'm going with this pattern of research. So those are the 4 writing tips for this month's video. Tip 1, make sure you plan out how characters get treated for illnesses, whether it's physical or mental. This goes a long way to expanding the world building for whatever it is that you're writing. Tip number 2, research job markets and typical professions based on the historical time period and the culture that you are using as a reference. This will make your choices a bit more believable for the reader. Tip 3, explore ways characters and societies treat money and how they live their lives based on what they have or don't have. Finally, tip number 4, consider the kind of monetary system that you want to use in your series. Follow these tips and you'll be well on your way to improving the world building that you have already been developing. Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications on new videos. You can support the channel on Patreon and the merch store. Those links can be found down in the video description. Make sure to tune in next year for a new top 10 list featuring children's author Claire Annette Nolan. Happy New Year!